It's only 31 or 32, isn't it?
That's right. It's humidity though, isn't it? Humidity conducts the temperature.
Plenty of headroom. Yeah.
Plenty of headroom, yeah. We'll see how much you really want it, hey?
Okay. All right. Well, we probably want to finish off the conversation about partner relationships, because we'd probably like to get on the conversation about children relationships with regard to God's standards, shall we? And most of you who have had children are going to find this pretty confronting. So just be prepared for that and relax. We're not condemning you for the rest of your life or anything like that. We're just stating some truths, that's all. Okay, so when it comes to your relationship with children, what's your version of love? You tell me.
What do you think your job is as a
What do you
parent?
think your job is as a parent? Those of you who've been parents, or anybody can be, even if you haven't been a parent, that's all right.
To awaken.
Just wait for the microphones. Yep.
So.
I would say to awaken this feeling of what you said yesterday, what conscience is saying through guilt, until it's clear in them, to give them boundaries to know, and so as to protect them, I would say.
I think a lot of parents think that, but that's really instilling your conscience in them, isn't it? Instilling your version of right and wrong in them. So a lot of parents feel that that is their job, I agree.
But most people are not focused on finding out firstly what God's standards are. They're mostly thinking about their own standards.
Yeah. Okay, yes. I was talking in this perspective, but as a mother back in the days, that's absolutely not what was done.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. That's what I want to
according
hear.
to my standard.
What
that's
was
totally
done
different.
when you were a mother, according to your own standards?
It was transmitting what I felt was true, but I can now see that it was very personal.
Yes. Okay. So
And with a special vision of what was right and wrong.
Yes.
And respectful and not respectful.
Yes.
And good for them, and so I see all the mistakes.
Hindsight, hey? Yeah.
But the answer I gave to begin with was according to God's standards.
Yeah.
I feel that's what a mother
So help them
will-
awaken to them.
very
Yes,
true.
Yes,
Very true.
which is a part of God's standard actually. As a parent, that's what you would do as a loving parent.
Yes,
Connect them to a source of truth that is
Yes.
reliable, more reliable than yourself.
yes.
Well, God's primary role is not for you to be a parent, but to be an educator.
Uh-huh.
You know, because these little souls are coming into the world uneducated.
Mhm.
And supposedly, because you've got 20, 30, 40 years of experience, you have some education. So God really, part of the role we should have is we're an educator of our children, not a parent of our children. Can I just focus for a
I would like to add, if I could,
Yep.
I really feel that our kids educate us to some extent.
Well-
Sometimes what is said through them can really, if you have the humility to listen, but
Well, the attractions they bring to your life certainly educate you. The attractions they bring into your life through their desires and their passions and their
Self-expression.
certainly will educate you, but your children have arrived uneducated. Remember I said right at the beginning that when your soul incarnates, it's uneducated. It doesn't know about itself yet. It doesn't know about life yet. It hasn't learnt anything yet. So the children, the purpose of having children isn't to educate you. You've got to be very careful of this idea. You want to argue? That's all right if you do. You just say you do.
no,
Remember?
it's be very careful with words.
Yep.
But so it is a belief, maybe, but
Yep.
some children
Yep.
might have a level of consciousness.
No,
So
I'm
that's
sorry,
where
no,
you say
they don't.
no. Okay.
they don't. No children who's ever incarnated on earth in the first incarnation, which all of you are actually still in.
First?
All of you, yeah, are in your first incarnation. Every single one of you. Who believes in reincarnation?
Yeah.
Yep, it's false. Yep. I know you have many reasons for believing it, but all of those reasons can be explained with other explanations that most people don't want to hear. Any celestial spirit, any spirit who's progressed towards God knows reincarnation is false. In fact, almost every spirit above the third sphere knows reincarnation is false, or that it's never happened. But there are still some spirits in the sixth sphere who want it to happen, but it's never happened. These are facts that I'm sharing with you. Whether you believe them or not, it's up to you. But there is no such thing as reincarnation, as it's taught on earth today. Stunned silence. Microphone, can we have a microphone up the back there? Just, I'll elucidate further if you want, but...
Accept the reincarnation you had when you...
No, we haven't reincarnated. We haven't gone through a process of incarnation.
It's different.
It's
Yeah, it's different, yeah.
Okay.
People refer to it as that, but I refer to it as our return, which is a completely different process. It's a completely different process than what you go through in your first incarnation. In the first century, I was in my first incarnation, and I've observed since then lots of incarnations, like millions of incarnations, and no one has ever been reincarnated. No one. But there are a lot of reasons why many of you believe they have. And that's something worth discussing, but maybe worth discussing tomorrow, because it's a spirit-related thing.
It is, yeah.
That we need to discuss there. So,
Yeah.
we might. I think it's best to focus that on tomorrow's discussion. So, but for today's discussion, with regard to children, they are not enlightened. No child who is ever incarnated is enlightened. They're not self-aware. No child who is ever incarnated has been self-aware. That includes me, by the way. In the first century, I was not self-aware when I first incarnated.
The purpose of incarnating is to gain self-awareness. That's the process that we're all in.
And it doesn't need to be repeated.
No. Once it's done, the job is done.
The job's done.
The earth life is...
And in fact, spirit life is far more effective for sorting out your emotional issues and your sin-based issues than earth life is. So every spirit, even those who believe in reincarnation, know that they can make progress in the spirit world. The general thought on earth is, you with regard to reincarnation beliefs, is that you go to the spirit world, you have sort of like a life review type of things, and you get to be your real self for a while, but then you've got to come back and learn additional lessons. So you come back to earth and learn additional lessons. God is not this silly. He only needs to do things once, and so when it comes to your education, you are going to get educated here. This is the nursery of your life. You're going to get educated here, and then you're not going to come back here. You won't even want to come back here, because you'll find the spirit life. There's far more colour. There's far more life. There's far more enjoyment. There's far more animals. There's far more creatures. There's a better environment. You've got bigger senses. Why would you want to come back here and have all that restricted again? There's only one reason, and that is try to educate someone else, not you. So the reality is, in the entire of this planet's existence, there's 7 souls that have returned, 14 people, but none of them have reincarnated. Now, I can say it for a fact, but if you don't believe me, that's fine. But if you have a look on our website, there has been a number of discussions where we've gone through with people, particularly one that comes to mind is one we did in Sweden. Until we were interrupted by that spirit overcloaked man.
I think it's called The Truth About Reincarnation.
And we went through, I think it was, I only got to mention probably 11 or 13 explanations for this phenomena of the feeling that people have that they're reincarnated, or the belief they have. I only got through 11 or 12 explanations, I think, before a spirit-influenced man who was so angry sort of just stopped the entire proceedings. And we had to just stop. He refused to leave. We had to call the police, but we couldn't talk anymore. He was just yelling and and that was the end of the conversation, unfortunately. But until that time, we did cover quite a bit of the material that I would have liked to have covered. But over the years, we have shared this with many, many people, obviously. But it is confronting, particularly when you've believed that or you've established that belief over quite a number of years of life looking for that evidence, right? But as I said, there is evidence. The evidence, seems to be the evidence of reincarnation, is all able to be explained with other explanations. And so, which we have done a number of times in our videos, but it's really confronting for groups of people who have sort of like a New Age background in particular, or a Buddhist background, or a Hindu background, to hear it, because that's been the substantial belief of their life. Yeah. So I'm not trying to undermine your entire life's beliefs. I'm just trying to share with you the truth. Does that make sense? Yeah. Pierre, you want to say something about that?
There was a very good channeling Mary did in Brazil, explaining the other side of spirits trying to reincarnate.
Yeah.
That was very enlightening.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was interesting in Brazil because almost everybody in Brazil, we found, aside from Catholic Christians, believes in reincarnation. And when we went there, it was really interesting because we started talking about God, and everyone was fine about that discussion, seemingly, right, about God. And then we started channeling some spirits that started talking about reincarnation to the Brazilians who were there. We had about 80 or 90 people at the first event. Everybody got upset with us. There was 8 people who came to the next event. Everybody got so upset. Yeah. But the spirits themselves were trying to tell the group in Brazil that we had that there was no reincarnation, but the people in Brazil wouldn't have it. The ones we met anyway. Yeah. And then, interestingly enough, we had spirits come and tell us about their experience of trying to reincarnate, what they were trying to do. And it was really quite sad because a lot of them were... See, when you're in a state in the first or second sphere, you can't see the spirit body of a child connected to the womb of its mother, because the spirit body of the child is in the 6th sphere, so it's much, much brighter than what you can see, and ethereal than what you can see. And so the spirits were thinking that that child had not incarnated. The body was created, but there was no child, no soul connected to the body. That's what they're thinking because they can't see one. And so they're trying to get in the womb, and this was happening for many of our Brazilian mothers, trying to get in the womb, sort of unbeknown to them, with the child, the soul of the child. They're trying to get into the womb, and they're connecting to the spirit body of that child right from the time of inside the womb, because the mothers are very open to this occurring, of course. And many of them, by the time they could speak, they were like talking like our Uncle Joe, or like somebody else, but it was a spirit who was connected in the womb to the child's body, speaking through the child when the child grew older. And this happens a lot when people believe in reincarnation.
Well, it's happening more and more.
More and more, actually. Yeah. Particularly in places like India, Tibet, Brazil, some places in Africa where they quite strongly believe in reincarnation as well at times. But there is no spirit above the 6th sphere who believes in reincarnation because they know it doesn't occur. And there's no one in the celestial heavens who believes in reincarnation because they know it doesn't occur. It's just for your information. So this life you got is the only one you're going to have here, probably. Make the best of it. Learn the most you can. But when you get into the spirit world, you'll be happy you left here. You won't want to come back. I haven't met a single person who wants to come back, aside from the spirits who believe in reincarnation. Because what happens with many of them is they stay in the sphere they arrive in, which is usually the first, and they think the only way they can progress from that place is to come back. And so they just stay there. They don't even try to progress. They don't even try to grow in love or anything. They just stay there. And they just stay there. And there's some that I've met that have stayed there for like 1,000 years. Stayed there, waiting to reincarnate, trying to, can't do it, overcloaking people, and then after a while they get told that that's what they're doing and they stop doing that. And then they go, well, how do I reincarnate? And spirits come to them and tell them the truth, but they don't believe them. And so they just keep trying. And I've seen, like I said, some of them stay there for 1,000 years doing that. And all that while not progressing, which is very sad, actually. Yep. By the way, I've also seen some Christians do exactly the same thing. They've arrived in the spirit world in the first sphere. They thought they should be with Jesus and God. They're not. So they go, oh, maybe I'm in hell. So now I'm here forever. Because the teaching of the Christian Bible is when you're in hell, you can't get out of it. Right? And they feel themselves, even though it's not burning, they feel themselves to be in hell. So they go, oh, I've just got to accept my fate. And they don't even try to get out of it. You can go and talk to them about it. And some of them I've talked to, and it's only been 200 or 300 years later that they've got out of it. Yeah. Your belief systems on earth have a large bearing on what you will choose to do as soon as you pass. Yeah. And what you choose to accept as soon as you pass. This is why the truth is so important to learn on earth. Because if you learn it on earth, you won't be misled by all these sort of roads leading to nowhere. You'll know where to head. And what we're sharing with you about progress is the same here and the same in the spirit world. So the beauty of learning it now is that you'll learn it here and you'll also do it in the spirit world and you'll progress. If you get locked into some of these belief systems on earth that are false, you may stay there for 100 years or a couple of 100 years, but eventually you'll get out of it. But it will only depend upon your openness to understand the truth. It depends on you as to how soon you'll get out of it. Make sense? So if we go out the back with the mic.
So I've got two questions.
Yep.
If we're not reincarnated souls, where have we come from? And secondly, are there hell dimensions?
Good questions, both of them. Of course, you probably won't care about both answers until you pass very much, right? Because it is what it is. But let's look at both questions. First question is there a place where unincarnated souls come from? The answer to that is yes. It's the same place that you enter when you're in a soul union. But the difference between a person in a soul union is they are fully self-conscious, fully conscious of themselves. The souls that are there next to incarnate are not fully conscious. They are not aware of themselves. They have instincts. And one of the primary instincts is to incarnate. So God created the soul to have instincts. One of those instincts is to go through the process of individualization, which is the process of separating, the two halves separating, each into a body. Then they have an experience which the individualization is complete. So as soon as you're conceived, your individualization is complete. From then on, you're learning.
And at that point, we're new souls created by God.
All the new souls are created by God?
Yes. Yeah, well, you're already created by God.
You're already there,
yes,
waiting for incarnation. They're not aware of time. They're not aware of space. They're not aware of dimensional space. They're not aware of experience. They don't have any experiences until they incarnate. Then they have experience.
And there are new souls being created all the time.
As far as we're aware, yes. And when I say as far, I see them appearing, but we don't know how long that will continue for. Obviously, that's all stuff that's in God's domain. That most of the people who are progressing towards God are yet to really understand fully. But the reality is, yes, they are all waiting to incarnate. There's at the moment in this physical universe 6 Earths that are being used for the process of incarnation. And those 6 Earths are in a very similar state to our Earth here. We've met some of the people who have come from those locations who are very similar to ourselves, who entered the Union State, and those people have had the same experience Mary and I basically have had, and they're also now back on their own planets doing the same thing we're doing. And why there's only 6, given the... Well, that's something, you know, I have my suspicions about, but it's really pointless sharing my suspicions with you. But you know, I think that God's got grander plans for us as individuals than just living life on earth and then living a bit of life in the spirit world. You know, He's got long-term plans, like infinitely long-term plans for what will happen to you in the future. But again, it's dependent upon your reception of God's love. In the end, it's well known now in the spirit world that the people who choose to not have a relationship with God will be left in the 6th sphere of the spirit world having that experience, and it's not known how long that experience will be. Right? It's also not known whether they'll ever grow from that experience. It's also well known in the spirit world that the opportunity to receive God's love will be removed at some point in the future, and there's loving reasons why that will be the case. And it's well known that if that happens, well, what happens to those people left in the 6th sphere? Well, nobody really knows the answer to that either at this stage. But those events are going to happen. How close they are to happening, we're not sure, but given the fact that on every single planet there are sort of people like Jesus and Mary, and on every planet doing the same thing we're doing, we would suspect it's going to happen quite soon. But soon in God's eyes might be 1,000 years, but we're not sure how soon. There's things we don't know because we haven't learnt them from God yet. Make sense? But yes, there is a pool of souls, billions, yet to incarnate. And we sort of feel that God will continue that process probably forever at this stage. Because the universe itself, the physical universe, which is where all souls incarnate, has a huge capacity to have more people in it. Yeah, there are literally millions of places like Earth in the universe itself, but only 6 of them currently are inhabited. So God has obviously prepared lots of places, but why are only a few of them inhabited? You know, that's an interesting question in itself. Obviously, God's got ideas for the future, right? And we can only guess what those ideas are. And many of us in the celestial heavens have gotten together and tried to guess, try to work it out, but we haven't come up at this stage. And also at this stage, God hasn't revealed that to us. So,
The
So
hells.
the hells. The
do
second question.
we generally stay in soul groups?
No. When I say no, what I mean is you grow, and as you grow, you change. And as you change, your speed of change will be very different to the speed of other people's change, because that is dependent upon your will, your free will. So no, you won't stay in the same group. Even if you end up in a group, you probably won't stay in that group, because your growth will probably be at a different speed than somebody else's growth, and therefore you will go to new things, and they might wait behind because they like where they are for a while. So many times what we see in the spirit world is that some people progress like to the 2nd sphere. The 2nd sphere is like heaps better than Earth. And so for a lot of people, they go, wow, this is heaps better than Earth. Why don't I stay here for a while? This feels good, you know. And there's a lot of people in the 2nd sphere, so there's a lot of people to get to know. And when I say lots, billions, more people than on Earth. And so there's lots of things to do, people to get to know, fun to have, parties to have, whatever, you know, learning to achieve. And a lot of people then decide, well, I really like this place and I'm a bit scared about moving on. I want to enjoy this place to the full, so they do. And so they stay there. I've known some in the 2nd sphere, 600 years, 700 years, 1,000 years, stayed in one place. Now, many of my friends progress through the 2nd sphere in the same time span as 1 Earth year. And then there's others who progress through the 2nd sphere 700 years. So obviously when those two might have known each other but one moved on and progressed to the third sphere, and the other ones stayed where they were. So what you will find will happen is that the groups of the people you associate with over time will change. Yep, and it's a bit different experience for Mary and I, because when you're sort of the first to do many things, you always go back to help the next person to do it, and usually those next persons are people who are pretty passionate about doing it as well, and so you end up associating with them more. But that being said, over the last 2,000 years, I've met millions of people, as you can imagine. You can easily meet 1,000 people a year, can't you? And in the spirit world, it's even more than that. Like, you can go here, go there at the blink of an eye, right? So meet lots of people. Many people who are famous I've met, but also many people who are completely unknown to Earth I've met. And in all of those meetings, everyone has been in a different condition, everyone's been in a different state, everyone's been in a different group of people initially, and then they've moved to other groups of people. Like, that's what makes life interesting. So imagine if you left Earth, you entered a group of people, you went with a group of people, and then for the rest of the time, 1,000 years later, same group of people. 10,000 years later, I know some spirits from this earth are 160,000 years old. Imagine 160,000 years later, same group of people. It'd be a bit boring, wouldn't it? Yeah. So God wants us to have an interesting life, meet new people, do new things. He's not going to constrain your life in any way, and that includes He's not going to predetermine what group of people you associate with. Your will do that.
So it's kind of your progression. If you progress quickly, you move on,
and also your interest as well. There's many people in the celestial heavens, Mary and I we know and we've met and we enjoy the company of, but we don't spend a lot of time with them because their passions are different to ours. And so, we don't have a lot of interaction with them. And then there's others who we know whose passions are more alignment with ours, and so we spend more time with them. Yeah. The second question you ask is, are there hells? Yes, is the answer to that question. We find many earthly philosophies, they either go in one of two ways. They go, there's no hell, and that way all of us feel good because we don't have to worry about what we might do or be,
where we might end up.
And then, or there is hell and you're going to stay there forever. Both of those things are not true. You won't stay in hell forever. There is hells, but you can get out of them. And
it's not one place.
Yeah. It's gradients of place based upon conditions. So there are some very dark places. Many of you, if you went there now, you'd be absolutely terrified of how bad they are. But after you progress a bit, you can see the wisdom in it all, because it helps the person. The condition matches their feelings. And so it's actually their most comfortable place to live. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you see the love in it. You sort of see, wow, like all the murderers, people who murder, for example, are in a certain condition and they are comfortable with the location they live in. But if they tried to be taken to a new location, they'd feel very uncomfortable, like very unhappy. If you took a murderer to the celestial heavens, he would probably die. Like his soul would, like, when I say die, I don't mean that's possible. What I mean is his soul would shrivel up in the sense of he'd try to protect himself from everything that was happening. He wouldn't bear the place.
So the place has to match your vibration.
It has to match your love. Let's call your vibrations what they're meant to be, love.
Right.
So that's when New Age terminology uses vibration. There is such a thing as vibration, but the reality is it's really love and the condition.
Or how much
love you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've actually, if anyone's interested, on our channel there is a number of spirit discussions where I channel the spirit and Jesus talks to them about their experience in the spirit world.
Yeah.
It's quite fascinating. Yeah, and some of them have experienced the hells and moved beyond that.
Right.
Yeah. And we also have talked to groups of spirits who believed in reincarnation. You know, because many spirits believe it, particularly in the first two spheres of the spirit world. After that, they start to not believe it so much, but some still hold on to it as a belief rather than feeling they have to do it. So they sort of hold on to it as a belief. And I've even met some spirits in the sixth sphere who still have the belief. I've also met sixth sphere spirits who are members of the Jewish religion, Islamic religion, Christian religion. They all now love each other, but their belief systems haven't changed very much. But now they don't, war with each other and don't have bitter disputes anymore. And I also have met in the spirit world groups of spirits who are still nationalities, like different nations. It's rarer, but they get together because they're all Serbian, or they get together because they're all Russian or whatever,
Yeah.
Rare, very rare in the sixth sphere. Usually it's based more upon desires and passions. But yeah, I've also met many groups of spirits who believe themselves to be gods as well. Yep. In the sixth sphere, there's no spirit above the sixth sphere who believes themselves to be God, but there's many spirits in the sixth sphere who do believe themselves to be a part of God or God. You're allowed to have false beliefs even in the sixth sphere. The perfect natural man is allowed to believe false things, right? As long as he's loving about it. In other words, as long as he doesn't damage other people with his beliefs, But he's allowed to have them. So God is not going to force you to change your beliefs. You're the person who's going to have to do that for yourself. But experience is a great way of changing belief. And none of those people I've mentioned have gone above the sixth sphere. Many of them don't believe there is a seventh sphere, even though they've been told there is one, because they have never been able to get to it, so they believe there can't be one. And then there's others who believe that the people in the seventh sphere are a different grade of person, that God created two grades of person. Some spirits in the sixth sphere believe this, many actually, believe that there's a greater person who goes to the sixth sphere and is very intellectual, and then there's a greater person who's very emotional and frivolous and too happy, and they go to other spheres above the sixth, but they think they're different creatures that God has made, even though all of those people have come from Earth. Yeah, so there's really, in the sixth sphere of the spirit world, there's a large variety of very fascinating beliefs, most of which are false, but because love has now been engendered, in each belief, to the point where they're loving each other, God allows such things to stay. But to get the seventh, you can't have those beliefs.
So it's the amount of love that takes you higher in those realms.
Correct. It's the amount of God's love that takes you higher, actually. To get to the sixth sphere, you only need development of human love. To get beyond the sixth sphere, you can't get beyond the sixth sphere without God's love. It's impossible. Physically impossible. Yep.
Now, we were talking about kids, and we're about to confront everyone.
But
and
all I said
digress.
was, we haven't answered the second question, which is about, I have answered the else.
You did.
But can you see how it's so easy to digress from the subject, isn't it? It's sort of like, he just said something, it's like, major, like,
That way.
whoop, back up. Talk to me about that. And we find this happens a lot in our groups where we make a statement, and then a group of people in the group feel like, what's going on there? Like, that's like pretty confronting. And so what happens then is they ask questions about that. And then, of course, out of love for you, I'd like to say the truth. But the net result is it sort of goes. So if you think about what began this question, my statement is, no child that incarnates is self-aware. None of them have any development except what is already being gifted them, which is the development of a sixth sphere spirit. In other words, the perfect natural man, when he incarnates, is the equivalent of a sixth sphere spirit in development, but without any awareness that he is.
With no understanding of the gift of free will, which is how you actually enact love or
Yep.
you must understand that you have free will. And a child who incarnates does not understand that yet. They immediately that they're born, really, they start to learn that.
Well, really, even conceived.
Well conceived.
Because
yeah.
they're absorbing beliefs from their parents in the womb. They're emotional beliefs mostly that they're absorbing at that stage. But yeah, from the time of conception.
Yeah, but really you begin to see it as soon as they're born, don't you? That they begin to understand, oh, here's my foot. If I move my foot, I get a response. If I cry, there's a response. If I...
When I'm touched, when I'm loved. A child is very sensitive to love, of course. So if a child is loved, it'll really respond to that love. And in fact, it's well known even in medical circles that if you don't nurse a child, if somebody doesn't nurse a child, like let's say a child's born and its mother dies, father is dead, it's left sort of orphan. If that orphan is not loved, then it stagnates in its development and even in its physical development.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the reality is love is very important for the child, but it has to be
God's standard.
God's standard of love. Yep. Yep. So the statements I make, I'm only making them to encourage you to investigate what I'm saying as a possibility at least. I know them to be true because I've experienced all these things, but I know you don't believe that, so I'm happy for you to, what do they call it? Well, to delay any decision. What's that called?
Procrastinate.
Procrastinate.
No, remain, suspend
Suspend
judgment.
judgment,
That's
yeah.
it. That's what you're saying.
And until you have had a personal experience. Now, for many of you, if you stay believing in reincarnation while you're on Earth, there is some potential dangers for you when you arrive in the spirit world if you stay in that belief. Just like if you stay believing like a Christian does on Earth, there are potential dangers if you arrive in the spirit world with that belief. And if you believe, as does a Muslim on Earth, then there are potential dangers of you staying in that belief after you pass as well. It's just like any belief on Earth. There's potential dangers, and I would like to highlight those potential dangers that I've observed over many thousands of years. Yep. Yes.
So after passing,
A bit closer
Just
with
put
the
the
mic.
microphone close to
passing
you.
away, you say that they are all coming from this realm, from Earth. Then there are 7 spheres to go, where you can reach the 7th one only when you are completely with.
Yes, I haven't said anything about that, have I? So again,
Jay,
segue, but actually,
we're never getting to the kids, are we?
there's
started
36
yesterday morning.
spheres.
Yeah, this is what I wanted
36.
to say. So after the 7th,
Up to the 7th, you are still in the realm of not yet being at one with God, in terms of having God's love in your soul to a completed degree, where you are now able to, when I say completed degree, to the point where everything you do is in harmony with the love, and therefore in harmony with every law. Right? So the transition happens in the 7th sphere. That transition is the giving up of your mind. And after the 7th sphere, it's all an emotional process of growth. So with the relationship with God is an exchange of emotion only, exchange of feelings all the time. And so that relationship is, you could say, the term I called it in the first century to when I was speaking to people was born again. That's when you classified as being born again, because you're a new person. You think differently, you feel differently, you don't use your mind much anymore, but you've still got the same personality and nature, and you're very aware that you're an individual. You're very aware that you are, and that you have freedom to grow and learn. You still have a spirit body at that point. So, and that spirit body is connected to half of your soul, your half of the soul. So if it's myself and Mary, and we're in the 8th sphere, I would have a spirit body. My half of the soul would be connected to a spirit body, and Mary's half of the soul would be connected to a spirit body as well. So we're still interacting body to body.
next question.
You just need to hold the microphone
That's my
closer.
next question, because you said before that you've been to many realms and you met many incarnations. And so, do they have, like, they look like us?
Yeah. A bit bigger on the average, because as your soul expands, your physical bodies change as well. And also you have different, once you receive God's love, there are different parts of your body that start to develop differently. But yes, you look like a perfect person.
But still,
No flaws, no.
But you're still individual.
You're
So
still
not
individual.
everyone doesn't look the same,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah.
and then progressing, like being 700 years, whatever.
Yep.
The body is not aging.
No, the body gets younger actually.
Actually, okay.
The more love you
Yeah,
kind of in the
every
spirit world.
celestial spirit looks about 23.
Amazing.
Something to look forward to again.
It's
Isn't
really,
it?
it's really weird for people they visit, because a lot of times they go and visit somebody, in the hills trying to help them or whatever. The person's 80 or 90, they look about 80 or 90, and sometimes they look older than that, to be honest. In the hills, you look pretty bad. So you have wrinkles and, you got grey hair, and sometimes the body is decaying, you got different illnesses as a result of the decay in the first sphere, and particularly in the hills. So let's say a celestial spirit goes to help somebody because he wants to help them, right, to get out of that condition. So he rocks up, he's 23. But he's been there 1,000 years. But the spirit who's looking at him goes, what can I learn from you? You're 23. Like...
So the spirit world is infinite.
Microphone.
So the spirit world is infinite.
As far as we are aware, well, of course, because God, we're not infinite. Only God's infinite, but the spirit world is large. God's the only infinite thing in the universe, and the universe itself is not infinite; it's limited. But when I say limited, far beyond the scope of human imagination, how large it is. There are literally, there's literally from one end to the other billions and billions and billions of light years of distance between the edges of the universe currently known, and also it's expanding, it's growing, and so it's constantly changing as well, the universe itself. But God supplies the energy for that to occur. Yeah. But it is growing infinite. It's going towards infinite, but it can never be infinite. Only God is. And God doesn't live in the universe either. That's a common misconception. God created the universe, so he doesn't live in it. He lives outside of it. Yeah.
You got to wait.
Way off traffic now.
I'm really interested in the subject of parenthood.
So am I.
Yes,
So-
me too.
Should we get back to something that's current? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So these other discussions, I like answering those questions, and there are times when we do presentations where we're specifically answering those questions, and we know that people are, interested in knowing the answer to these physical things. But the reality is that even if you know the answer, frequently it doesn't benefit you immediately. Yeah, right now. We want to help you with the things that are going to benefit you immediately. Yeah. So, children, how do you bring up children? It benefits you immediately because for most people, the reason why they arrive in hell has got nothing to do with anything else than how they've brought up their children. Now, isn't that a scary thought? Right? But it's true. It's because the average person sort of does average things when they're on Earth, don't we? We, get a house, get a car. Nowadays, back in the old days, it'd be a chariot or a horse or a oxen or something. An ass we used to ride in. And so you get some mobility, you get a place to live. For us, we mostly visited other people's places and lived there, but we did have a place like a retreat in the first century that Mary and I would go to. Favourite place just for us occasionally. It was very occasionally. Mary had the money for it, so she owned it, and and I became like a kept man, you know. But no, it's not like that at all. But, so Mary, in our relationship in the first century, had money, and I didn't have much because I spent most of my time walking around teaching people, right? So, so she also had a home, and we'd occasionally visit that home and be there. Mary also had a business in the first century, and this is common, isn't it, in day-to-day life? You have a business, you have a home, you have a life, you have all of these things going on in day-to-day life, and a lot of that life is quite average, with the exception of how you treat your children. With how you treat your children, you're now bringing a soul into the world, and you are very much focusing your attention on the development of that child, for the most part. And for most part, most of us don't understand how our own standard of love interferes with the development of the child greatly. And the reality also is that most people don't understand that until the spirit world, until they arrive in the spirit world. Now, of course, we would like to see that change, because if we give our children the best possible opportunities for growth while they're on earth, then of course it means that there's far less limitations when they arrive in the spirit world. So it's going to help their life in the spirit world. It's going to mean that they will be happier when they arrive in the spirit world. They'll know more truth when they arrive in the spirit world. They'll be more engaged when they arrive there. They'll be less frightened when they arrive there if they know the truth. They'll also know how to progress if we properly educate them on earth.
Yeah, and they won't just be all those things in the spirit world. They'll be that on
On
earth.
earth. Yeah, they'll have all these things on earth.
Yeah.
There's a very strong likelihood if we educate them right on earth, they'll find their soulmate while on earth. And they'll have a very happy life while on earth, as well as in the spirit world. But a lot of the skills of parenting are God educated. And what I mean by that is, unless the conscience is open, that connection with God is open, you won't have an education of how to be a parent. Right? And so when your child is 1, you're a 1-year-old parent. When your child is 2, you're a 2-year-old parent, and so forth, right? And a lot of the times, because the conscience is not open, because you're only a 1-year-old parent and the conscience isn't open, you're not getting any assistance from God to get help in terms of how to properly, bring up children. What you choose to do in your standards is going to have a great effect on the development of that child. So, do we all agree with what I just said? Or you can see that would be the case? Now, all of you who have been parents know how unsettling it is to have your first child, right? Where you're looking forward to it and you're excited, but you're also, what do I do? What do I do? I don't know what to do. Nobody's really given us much education. Now, of course, our parents and what we observe in society show you how to physically care for the child for the most part. But there's very little knowledge about the emotional education, spiritual education, and sexual education of the child. Very little knowledge in those areas. We sort of focus on the physical, don't we? We care for the child, feed the child, change its, deal with its bodily functions. But there's very little we can do, very little we know about how do the laws work with the emotions of the child, and how does the child reflect my emotions, and why is the child crying right now? I've got no idea. Like, why the child's so upset. And I've changed, I've cleaned it up. There's no bodily function problems that are going on. I've fed it, it's fine. It seems tired. It's not going to sleep. What's going on? I don't know. And this is the kind of, in those places we worry a lot generally as parents. We think, what's the trouble with my child? And you know what it's like being a parent. If that goes on for days and days and days, you're now going, you're wired as well, worried and everything about the child. And is it sick? You take it to the doctor. There's all these things we do, mostly because we don't understand how to educate the child or even understand the child. because a lot of what's going on for the child is happening at the soul level emotionally and spiritually. And we're focused on the material, but a lot of what's happening for the child is not material, it's emotional. What is it feeling from its environment? What is it feeling from its parents? The different feelings that it's absorbing, how it feels because of those feelings. When you're afraid, how does it feel? When you're ashamed, how does it feel? A lot of parents are not educated in these things, and so naturally they're focused on just trying to care for the physical. So when it comes to children, in the first few years, we are fundamentally just focused on physical, aren't we? Which is fundamentally educating the child how to use its senses. Sight, hearing, language as a result of hearing, speaking, obviously language as well, how to express itself. We're educating the child in terms of how to, what it can eat, what it can't eat. A little 2-year-old goes around picking up everything and eating everything. And we go and put that down, that's poisonous, put that down, We're educating the child on a physical level with its senses. So we're actually helping the child to start to understand its senses. That's the first phase. Now, by the time the child's walking, usually by 18 months, right? The child's walking. For some, 9 months, by the time the child's walking, we're starting to now educate the child about things that it can do and can't do. And a lot of those limitations are placed upon it by us. Right? We're saying, you can't do that because I'm scared. Right? I did that with one of my sons. He used to go along into the PowerPoints, sticking forks into PowerPoints. So I'm freaking out. Like I'm going, I don't want a child doing that. How do I control my child from doing that? And I tried all sorts of methods of restricting him. None of it worked. So I ended up, I was also a Christian at the time, ended up belting him. Right? Yeah.
Not belting him. You hit him.
I hit him with my hand, which is, in Australia, that's called belting your child. So I ended up hitting the child. Now, Tristan, my oldest son, to this day, is still frightened in some aspects of those things.
Of taking initiative. Yeah.
Taking initiative as a result of what I did. Right? And even though I've gone through my sadness and crying about what I did and gone through repentance about what I've done, he still has that injury. That's the damage you do to your children, right? Yeah. But the bigger damage is more emotional, right? How we educate them with standards of love emotionally. So what are our standards of love as parents? It's like, I'm your parent. This is one standard. I'm your parent, so you should listen to me. That's the standard most parents have. Without there being any justification for them listening other than you're their parent. Right? So that in itself is saying, because I brought you into the world, which by the way you didn't, all you did is have sex, right? Like God's mechanism brought them into the world. The whole process of incarnation was God created, not you creating it. All you did is create two bodies, the physical one and the spirit one. And the soul, which was created by God, came to those two bodies. And you attracted that soul to those two bodies because of personality and a number of other things. But it's not because the child was meant necessarily to be with you, but because you were the best choice for their soul to influence yours. Right? But it's happened. That child is now your child, and you call it your child. Whose child is it? God's, not yours. But even the idea that it's my child is already a flaw. It's already an injury that we're telling the child. We're saying, you're my child. No, they're not your child. They're God's child. You just created the bodies they live in. And you didn't even do that. God's mechanisms to do with genetics did that. Right? So all you did was have sex. So how does that make you them your child? You all creating the bodies, the soul is not your child. It's God's child. And by the way, it's half of the soul. So there's another half of that soul somewhere else as well. And that's not your child either. That's half of God's child as well. And isn't one of the very first things we'd like to do is educate them how to meet? Like, right from the beginning would be great, wouldn't it? To open up any barriers we have to the same or opposite gender, any barriers we have towards resistance towards them leaving the nest, as we often say. That all needs to be dealt with as well. So there's a whole heap of emotional pressures that come from the parents towards the child without the parent taking a physical action. Isn't there? And it's the emotional pressures that are out of harmony with God's standard of love that now is going to damage the child. So an example of that is, you're my child. That's an example of it. By me believing Tristan is my child, Tristan being my, wrong word, isn't it? Older son. By my believing that he's my child, I'm now taking ownership over God's child, which is actually an error. It's God's child, not I need to educate my child from the beginning. He's not my child, he's God's child. He's a precious one of God's children that I need to, because I chose to create the bodies and I chose to take the responsibility of creating those bodies and bringing them into the world. I've also chosen to educate this child, God's child. I've chosen to educate him as well as I possibly can, given my own limitations and flaws. Right? That's my role.
Just even the reason we have children, that's where I start from. I didn't plan the pregnancy, but just that I just wanted love because I didn't have any love. So all the burdens that we put on them even before we even conceived, I think.
That's right. A lot of people have children so that those children will love them. You know, they think this way, like, I'll have someone in my old age to love me. In fact, in our times, if you didn't have 4 or 5 or more children, you had no one to care for you in your old age. So the whole purpose in our time, in the first century, of having children was you've got to have a pension plan. And the children were the pension plan.
It's still that way in many places on earth.
Yeah. So that's not loving to have that as a desire, but that's how it was, you know. And so there's many emotions in that place that we're projecting at them. We're saying, you're my pension plan, you're my old age, you'll love me in my old age, you'll care about me in my old age. You also, for many, you validate all the things that I didn't experience. I'm going to try to get you to experience. So because I want to live my life through you is fundamentally what many parents feel. This is all out of God's harmony with God's standards. God's standards are far more loving than that. It's about giving your children gifts, particularly the gift of education, giving them that gift. So what we notice here is that many of you are not that worried about educating your children, right? You're very relaxed about how you educate your children. Very, very damaging to your children. You have no understanding, if you do that, how damaging that is. Because what happens is everything they have not been educated in, they don't know anything about. And if they don't know anything about it, how do they know whether it's one of their passions or not? They won't know. Now, there's some of your children who are mathematicians, but they know nothing about maths. God created them to be mathematicians and enjoy it, and they know nothing about it. So how are they ever going to discover their true nature if you don't educate them in maths at least a bit? You know? And the same applies with language, the same applies with art, music, the same applies with science, chemistry, the same applies with all these other forms of education. The more we allow the child to select its own education, the more we're actually creating a dependency of that child upon us. Because at the end of the day, we want to have the child, and this is how God feels about you. He wants you to have as wide as possible experience as you possibly can, so that you can make a choice of what you actually like. what you want for your future, what you enjoy doing. That's what he wants for you. He wants you to have as wide as possible experience. And on top of that, he wants you to have as wide possible social experience as you possibly can. So, you know, when a mum and father like home educate their child, it might sound great, but at the end of the day, you're educating them in your emotional injuries.
And they have no exposure
And they
to
have
anyone
no
else.
exposure to anybody else's. And so they have no social skills, those things are not happening, right? And so what if one of your children is a humanitarian, and yet they've never met and been able to interact with other children? And in particular, they've never been able to solve their problems in interactions with others. They rely on you to do that. How are they ever going to know and grow the capacity to actually learn to love other people when everything's governed by you? They need to have their own experiences. Our personal experience has been this. Your child, by the time of 5, should know how to look after itself, how to clean up after itself, how to do its own meals, how to wash its own clothes, how to iron its own clothes if it needs to iron clothes. It needs to know how to purchase clothes. It needs to know how to use money, because in this world we have money, so you need to know how to use it. It needs to understand what love is so that it can interact with others. It needs to be able to make its own decisions in a lot of these areas, or be educated by you to do so. And then on top of that, it doesn't have to live with you.
By the age of?
5. 5. By the age of 7, certainly. But by the age of 5, that'd be the goal. Now, we have had some influence on others in terms of like helping them with this, and the ones that have actually done it, their children are like way ahead of everybody else in the world, like their age, way ahead.
Yeah.
And now they go to school, and they love school, and the teachers love them, and they love going there, and they love learning all these different things, and they know what we know ones that are 12 years old know what they want to be when they grow up. They know their passions.
Well, maybe we can give some examples, because I'm sure the parents involved wouldn't mind.
Yep.
So I think Eloise's example is very good, because it shows where she was headed and where the kids have ended up. So Eloisa, and she was married at the time to Peter. We met them maybe 13 years ago.
Probably 13, 14.
And their kids, Eloise was pregnant with their youngest, and Charlie must have been 1 and Isabella 3, I think. So
that was their age at the
3
time.
under 3 she had. Or 4, but yeah, 3 under 4. And Eloisa and Peter both, and particularly Peter, had a bad time at school. They didn't want their kids to ever go to school. They were going to homeschool their kids. Eloisa's actually got a master's in education, so she was going to be a great homeschooler. And their children ran free. They had a big sheep station.
20,000 acres.
They ran free, but they were wild kids, as in they didn't give Mum a moment's peace. Mum was still running around just trying to put out fires everywhere. They had a lot of spirit influence. They were pooing in the house, and they would literally, Mum would sleep because she's exhausted, and she'd wake up, there'd be flour all over the kitchen, and like very, very wild kids. Because Pete and Eloisa both had this very strong injury, actually, escaping their own suppression in their childhood, that my child must have freedom. And so, and also both very mediumistic people, so very open to spirits, so then their kids became open to spirits. Anyway, we met them around this time, and we started to talk to them about, well, if your child is homeschooled and you're aware that you have issues in yourself, how are they going to be exposed to anything else? And also, the reality is God has laws that govern your existence. There are limits to how we live, and there's cause and effect. This exists. If we do something silly, it hurts. And if you are always protecting your child from that operation by taking away consequences and doing everything for them, how are they ever going to be educated in God's laws if you have no law in your own household? So they began to work on this idea of having law.
And also breaking the spirit influence.
Yes. and that's probably a whole other
thing we can talk about.
Yeah.
At another, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow. And then when it came time for school, they made the decision that the kids would go to school. And actually, the kids thrived at school. They were at home receiving at least from one parent.
It's probably good to say, before they went to school,
They couldn't talk.
they couldn't even talk.
The boys couldn't talk very
Like,
well.
by the time they were 4 years of age, they still couldn't express language.
Because they were so used to
Because they
mum.
had everything done to them. Mum would guess what they wanted, and they'd go up to him and go, and she would go, oh, do you want this? And oh, do you want that? And they go, you know, like, they just grunt at her, and she'd go and get it and give it to her.
And theirs is not the only family where I've seen that happening.
We see it happening a lot.
And they were
actually.
assessed by a speech pathologist who said, yes, they have developmental delays in their speech and it's a clinical issue. And they didn't go down that.
With two of them, they wanted to put them on speed for
ADHD.
ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
don't remember that bit, but yeah. Anyway, they decided to just put them in
two
school.
boys.
And meanwhile, Mum especially was working on, okay, well, what are my issues? Do I want this relationship with God? What are God's laws? How would I reflect them in the house? There were some rough years because their first few years were very lawless. So Mum having to work through her own issues with law. Emotionally,
Yeah.
and then figure out how to implement that in a loving way in the house so that her house reflected God's laws as much as possible. And the kids obviously had some experience with their will being out of control and lawless, and so they were very angry when Mum started to implement law.
Hitting her and punching her.
Yep, and she went through a whole process of basically sticking to it, and now her kids are they do very well at school, all three of them. One of them has a scholarship for university next year, but they've all also had an education in God's laws in their home environment. So they can move between an environment that is really has their
Unloving.
high school is often unloving. They've had to deal with certain emotions in their high school because it's not always kind, as we've all been to high school. But they do have a sense. She implemented with them under our recommendation that they learn how to cook from when they were quite young. They learn how to do grocery shopping. They learn
By
how
the
to wash
time they
their
were
clothes.
7, they were given a budget and they had to go and do their own
Mum
shopping.
took them to the supermarket and taught them how to do it, and they had their own key card and they did it. And now they're great kids in terms of their personal self-responsibility. You know,
So we go
go
around
for
there for
dinner
lunch
and it's awesome. Like the kids, they're not kids. I can't call them kids.
Yeah,
you know,
but
they're
when they were 10, they were making lunches for the family.
excellent kale salad and
Yeah.
soup and stuff. You know, very delicious food, and that's under their initiative. Archie, the youngest, is a member, or he's a volunteer.
He's the only child member, a person under 18 who's a member of God's Way.
Yeah, the not-for-profit.
Non-for-profit
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
He's really passionate about it. He wants to be an engineer.
Yeah, and he set up his own work experience with a local
He
engineering
set up his
firm.
own YouTube channel.
Just told Mum, that's what I'm doing, you know.
He does
So-
videos sharing like his experience with emotions.
Yeah,
He's
So-
12, right?
We often teach kids that they don't have a capacity that they have, but also often what I notice in this community, there's a lot of rebellion against structure, authority and suppression in your own childhood, that you then want to give your child an experience that is the opposite of that, but you miss out on educating them that there is loving structure, there is loving authority, and
There is
that
loving law.
your role as a parent is to teach. It is to teach your children that cause and effect
Yeah.
is a real thing, not
Yeah.
to remove effects from them. Another little boy in Australia, Elias, he must be turning 3 at the end of this
He's 3,
year. But he's already washing. He's got his own sink. He makes his own porridge. He washes up all of his own dishes. He hangs out his clothes. So kids are able to do a lot of things from very young. Yeah. He comes to the God's Way because his mum's a manager in God's Way. So he comes and he's given his own bucket to do the environmental
He does
tasks
his own
with.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he complains about it and has a spit about it, nobody comes to his rescue.
You'll say, you just need to have your feelings now, Elias.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of possibilities for kids to really experience their own nature a lot younger than they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
as soon as, in fact, Eloisa had broken the spirit influence over her two boys in particular, their personality started to come out.
It was
Before
so
then,
lovely.
they didn't even really have a personality. The personality was just destroy everything. Was really their personality. And then after the spirit influence was broken, then of course their personality started to be expressed, which was really enjoyable to see, because the very first few years that we visited them was like visiting a disaster zone, you know what I mean?
And poor Eloisa, you know.
And she was so distraught most of the time, as you can imagine. She'd go shopping and they'd destroy the supermarket, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because she was raised in a family that really pandered to men, you know, and so she had
And
two.
also, it was a sort of what was the educational background? It was
Steiner,
Steiner,
but
very
also
permissive in a lot of ways.
a lot of spirits in her childhood
Childhood.
affecting things. Sorry?
Steiner school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rudolf Steiner?
She was.
Yes.
She was educated in a
By
Steiner.
her
Her dad's
parents.
a Steiner principal. Yeah.
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 And,
But a lot of there are elements of the Steiner teachings that are very open to spirits and
influences.
mythology and spiritism and stuff like that. That then, if there's no morality in the family, those spirits can really affect the happenings in that family.
Yeah. So the big contrast is, like, and this is probably what we need to get back to, and that is, if you do things God's way, there's huge benefits, not just to yourself as parents, because your children will be more self-responsible, more able to care for themselves, more self-actuated, more able to decide what they want to do with their life, not being nursed for the rest of their life and so forth. But also there's advantages to them as children. Like they will develop faster, they will have more skills earlier. And remember, as Mary said, the boys in particular were diagnosed to have developmental disorders, and yet, like 5-7 years later, they're top of their classes in almost every
bright.
subject.
Yeah, but also very self-motivated in that. You know, Eloise, they do their own homework. They
She
do
never
their own
has the time to do
assignments.
homework.
She's not involved in their education in the academic sense at all,
'Cause
because
they
they're
want
very
to.
responsible for what they want to achieve and what they're interested in, and that
Yeah.
drives them.
All of them, even the eldest, know what they want to do with their life. The youngest, in particular, Archie, he really he's like every single break he has, he's engineering. He went and visited a local engineer and said, every time I get off school, can I come to your engineering place and you show me things, or I'll just sit over your shoulder and learn from you? And they agreed. So he did all that by himself. He didn't ask Mum to do it for him or anything like that.
He just told Mum, "Oh, Mum,
He just
I'm
told
doing
her,
this
Mum,
thing."
I need to stay in town 2 hours extra on these nights. And he also organises his own work experience. He comes to God's Way, organises. Cornelius is a builder. He works with Cornelius every time because he wants to learn about building. And he sits down with Cornelius and myself when we do engineering. And so he knows what he wants to do with his life already. And he's already, like, with his own passion. Mum doesn't tell him to do any of these things. He does them all for himself.
Yeah, a lot of times when we parent, we're actually instilling limits in children. Even when we think we're giving them a free and easy childhood, we're placing a limit. If we want to be lawless ourselves and rebel against law, the child doesn't understand the love in law, that law actually is something that can guide me, that can teach me, that can give me a response when I'm unloving, and that I can engage in a loving way and actually achieve a lot. When we want to be lawless and without law, the child never gets to experience those things, and therefore they're limited in their education, in their life skills.
Yeah, we notice that many of you mothers don't like structure, don't like organisation, because you've obviously had a bitter experience with probably your fathers, right, or some
Or
school
education, yeah.
experience where these things have been belted or forced into you through violence. But the reality is God loves structure, God loves organisation, God loves science. God's the best mathematician, like he's the universal mathematician. Every single thing that happens in the universe is a result of maths. He loves maths. He loves science. He loves, that's why he created a scientific universe, right? So when we limit our children in their experience in these things, we're actually cutting down their own ability to understand themselves to the degree where they know what they want for their future and they're passionate about it. Yeah, so, how's that?
Agreed, too hot, can't think. Yeah.
Excellent.
And when the damage is all done,
What do you do then?
yes, I have four kids,
Yeah.
four children. One I aborted the first one,
Yeah,
so I have a little one of 12,
yeah,
but the other ones are 25, 30, and 35.
yeah, damage done, eh? Yeah, it's, by the time they're 12, the damage generally is done. So what do you do? What do you do as a parent? Well, this is where courage is required as a parent, right? Because somehow, when you learn the truth, somehow, of course, you want to correct something. But firstly, the first thing to correct is why you did what you did. So, in other words, if I wanted my children to have this no laws, then why did I want that for my children?
What pain was
What
I
pain
avoiding?
was I avoiding to want that for my children? If I want my children to have no maths, no science, what pain am I avoiding about those particular subjects? You know, you'll find probably related to father generally, abuse. When I say abuse, you know, intellectual abuse in the sense of, you know, I'm better than you, proving I'm better than you because I know more than you, and all these kind of things that a lot of men do. These kind of things have an effect on the children quite a lot. So what we need to do is go through, firstly, our own emotional reasons why we chose to do what we did. Now, for me, that was pretty tricky. In this life, in the first century, I died before my first child was born. Sarah was our child in the first century, and I died before she was born. So Mary had the total care of Sarah. So I never had an experience of having a child until this life. And so this life, I obviously had two boys, two sons. And in that process, I did a lot of damage to these sons. I was educated in a Christian background. I was educated, I was very intellectual, hardly any emotional connection at all. And even though in my own childhood I was very artistic and musical, I suppressed all that by the time I was an adult for the most part, and I started learning music again when I was like 28 or 29 or something. By that stage, I had my children when I was 21, my first child, 23 for the second. So I knew nothing. Like most parents who are 21, know nothing really. And it took me to work through issues of love. It took me a long time to work through the issues of love. By the time I was 40, so from 33 to 40, I'd worked through many of the issues that I had with how I brought up my children. Now, once I realised that I'd done the wrong thing, and I then, if you're really sorry about it, you feel like you want to fix it. But the trouble is, by the time I was 40, my oldest was 19. My youngest was 17. By this stage, they were in relationships, they had friendships, and by the time my oldest was 19, he wasn't living home anymore, nor is my youngest at 17. They decided I enabled them to do specific things, but I also did a lot of things out of guilt then, where I felt, I did the wrong thing there, so now I've got to fix it out of guilt. So I did things like, I never had a good car when I was young. I never had a good house when I was young. By this stage, I was a property developer, and I had 13 houses, and so I gave them one to live in, not understanding the damage it would do to them. And then I gave them a car each, not understanding the damage. So I acted in guilt, not understanding the damage the guilt would do to them either. So that developed in them expectations as well, that they should get things easy, without work and without effort. And so I had done damage. I recognised the damage, but instead of actually processing through the damage emotionally, I tried to correct my behaviour by reversing some decisions I was making But in the process of reversing those decisions, I made more damaging decisions. By the time I was 40, I started seeing that clearly, that I was actually making some very bad decisions. Even in my guilt, I was making bad decisions. I wasn't the kind of parent who tried to browbeat them into change. So I wasn't going to try to push them into change. But I did everything I could to influence their change through giving them things and all sorts of things like that, which actually just made the problem worse. So then I had to go, right, I've got to really find out what is God's standards here. And then I realised one of the easiest things I found in life was to find out God's standards, because God has done to me, with me, the way his standards are. So did he give me anything that I didn't have to work for? No. Never. Ever. The entire time. The only time it happened was in my developing years when I was a child. That's the only time it happened. When my mother and father had to care for me. That was the only time I got something that I didn't have to work for. The rest of the time I had to work for it. And I learnt that very young, actually, in my life, my own personal life. I had a business by the time I was 6. I had 2 businesses at 7, and I was earning, at some points, more than my father was when I was 8. When I was 12, I earned more than my father earned. He was a boilermaker, and I just did a lot of other things, but there was all these little projects. And actually, when I was 13, my father had a terrible accident, broke his leg in so many places that he couldn't walk for nearly 4 months. And the family lived off of my earnings for 4 months. Right? So I had learnt personal responsibility, but I hadn't taught it to my sons.
In fact, you were so responsible for everyone that you took away responsibility from your
them.
sons. Yeah.
That's how. So while it was good for me, I'd learnt a lot of things. I didn't teach my sons the same beneficial things that I had learnt, and then I had to take stock of all this. Well, how did God treat God? God wanted me to go and do that work when I was 6 and learn about caring about other people by the time I was 8 and be able to support even an entire family by the time I was 13. He wanted me to learn these things. Why didn't I think, why wouldn't I try to help my sons learn those things? Like, crazy, right? So I realised I had not taught my sons a lot of things they needed to learn. One of those things was self-responsibility, of course. Now, when I started to do that, both of them were like very angry with me about it. It got to the point where I had to kick them out of my own house, right? Because they refused to clean it, they refused to mow the lawns, they refused to do a lot of things. So I had to evict them from my own house, from the house I'd given them. And interestingly enough, because of some of the injuries they imbibed during that time, it took them nearly 20 years for them to even go to purchase another car other than the one I bought them. That's how strong their demand was to have things provided. And now I had to deal with that emotionally. I didn't take it out of them. I knew it was my problem. I knew that I'd created this problem. And so all I've tried to do in that time now is I've tried to change my own behaviour by dealing with my feelings, firstly, and then acting the way in harmony with God's standards, what I know God's standards are, acting in the same way no matter what the result, including the fact that they might not like me. Right? Now, that has been, for me, a very difficult process, because I remember for a period of time during this process, I would go, wow, like I can see my own children, in some cases, don't care for other people. What do I do about that? I didn't teach them to care about people. Now my older son does care about people, my younger son less so, but I didn't do anything to really inculcate that. I did, in my own life, I was caring about people all the time. but I never taught them to. I never gave them that education, right? So my sons are upset with me about not giving them education they think they should have got. And I'm thinking, no, you shouldn't have got that education. That's really bad. And then they're upset with me about education they did get, which I know I should have given them, but they didn't like as well. And but that being said, they are now self-responsible men, even though my oldest is 40 and my youngest is 38. Right? They are at least self-responsible beings, but you know, obviously a lot of damage I did there, and a lot of things I've had to repent for, and I've had to go through it emotionally. I've had to feel about it emotionally.
And that's something that we've talked about, isn't it? Because there's a lot of also things about your relationships with women that have changed in you.
Big things, yeah.
Things
I
where
used to do everything that I possibly could for every woman I met. Because I sort of understand that many of you ladies have had hard lives. You've had, you know, abuse from men in your past and so forth. But instead of sort of acting in a balanced way, I just like exhausted myself doing things for women.
and had no standards for how the woman treated you.
None.
Yeah.
None at all.
And so that's been reflected in your sons' lives as well, hasn't it?
That's right.
And
They haven't had a good standard of how they should be treated from a woman, for example.
And you've often said to me, while you talk to your sons about that, the truth about what you now see, a lot of times they still want to act in it. And so it's really about...
And I know that they can only change by feeling their own stuff now. But that's a part of the things I'm sorry about, because if I hadn't taught them that stuff, they wouldn't have to feel about that stuff. So that, you know, so I'm very aware of those things. And so it's taken some time for me to work through the issue of repentance for what I've done. Now, if you, instead of working through repentance about what you've done, start to try to get them to change so you don't have to feel guilt, that is a very damaging thing to do. Yeah. Now, I did that for a short period of time, for about 2 years, and I did way more damage in that period of time than I had done probably before then in the actions of guilt. So then I learned, well, yeah, my guilt, I need to, you know, deal with that by myself, you know, not try to compensate for my prior behaviour with new behaviour that's just going to make it worse. And so that, you know, I learned that lesson pretty quick. And because I was more self-reflective by that time, I learned that lesson fairly quickly. But by the time your children have got their own development, the only thing you can do is to encourage them to work through the injuries you created. And the only thing really you can do is to be extremely sorry about the injuries they created, but you can't let them take advantage of the injuries that you created. In other words, you can't go, because I created that in you, I'll tolerate your bad behaviour towards me now. You can't do that either, right? And so it gets pretty tricky sometimes doing it God's way, because on one hand you know and you're feeling all of the damage you've done, but on the other hand you can't do more damage, and you also can't tolerate bad behaviour from now on.
Even if you created that in them. Yeah. But, you know, God really wants to help your kids too, as adults.
They're his children, right?
Prayer, you know, God's got them in hand, you know, and God's laws are trying to correct them.
Yeah.
But your prayers, you know, I have great faith that your prayers also impact on them. Yeah.
So I pray for my boys every day. Not in a condescending manner. I just pray that they recognise certain things and that they come to terms with certain things that I've done. A lot of times I pray about it because I know I've done that to them, and it's now damaging their life, even if sometimes they think it's good. My younger son in particular thinks a lot of the things that I did with women were good, and he thinks he's good doing them too. And he's going to end up with the same realisations that I've had to have later in life, that they're not good. But, you know, so I pray for that enlightenment process to occur for them. But I am also very aware they're not my children, and I did a bad job educating them. And of course, if I had another child, I wouldn't do the same things. But you know, you can't change a retrospective action, can you? You can only repent for it. You can only be sorry about it. And also, when I say repent, part of repentance is compensation, like doing what you can. One of the reasons why I talk with you about children is a part of my repentance for what I've done with my children.
To try and make it better for
other
other
people's
kids.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are things that you can do to improve the situation. But once the child has developed, usually by the time of 12, 13, unless the child is very open to having really honest and sincere and direct conversation with you, it is going to be very difficult for the child to change unless the child wants to. After that, you're not going to be able to force the change. You're not going to be able to control the change. You're not going to be able to control their actions after that point.
It's not going to help sending them every Divine Truth video you watch.
In fact, if anything,
They'll go,
we've seen
"Oh,
parents do
Mum."
that, and they've done a lot of damage to the child's reception of truth through that process, because the child just feels badgered, and and at the end of the day, in the end, the child has just felt like the last thing I want to hear about is Jesus and Mary and what they teach. Because parents have sent them stuff, trying to assuage, they're trying to make their own guilt go away. So that you can't do any of those things. It's all unloving to do anyway, isn't it? Trying to make your own guilt go away when you did what you did, and you've got to take the consequence of it really now. Yeah. So we go there and there. Okay, so on this side there, thank you. Una, is that? Yeah.
Doesn't that happen as well in relationships or with soulmates? Can that happen too? Like wanting to, like having a conflict with someone,
Yeah.
and then you repent or you forgive or whatever, but you're not able to change them. You really love them, but you cannot change them, and you want to have
Of course
God's
it does,
standards
yeah.
of
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
So kind of for your own sake, you've got to remove yourself from that relationship. What do you do in that in let me see if I can explain myself better. So let's say that I want to do the
Your
God
question is a
standard thing.
relationship question,
Mhm.
which we'll come back to. Your question was about children? Yep.
Yeah, who had the
Let's
microphone
focus
here?
on the where were we there? Yep. Can we focus on the children thing subject first? Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to ask two questions. One
Sure.
was about the education system
Yep.
that I personally, and we might have, so that's the one. And the second one is about our daughter that's 11 that is scared to go to sleep by herself, and it's her only fear. And I wanted to, maybe you can help me with that. So
I
those
don't
are-
think it's her only fear, but yeah.
Okay.
Definitely not our only fear, is it?
Okay, yeah.
It's the
So
only fear that you can observe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, true. So just around the education system, so it's true that a lot of us are here and we're not, I'll talk about myself. My husband and I both had injuries from the education system,
For
so
sure.
we didn't want our daughter to go to the regular school.
Yep.
And
Which
that's-
is about you, not her.
Yeah, that's about us.
And that's really, if you think about it, quite selfish, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something you got to come to terms with yourself.
Yes, but just from my research around the education system, and especially today,
Yep.
I mean, in this world, I just feel it's such a horrible place to send my child. I'd like her to be educated, and she's gone through many different systems
Yep.
to try, and the last one was one that she actually really liked, and we always wanted her to be educated and really, and opened her to so many different things of her, but not in the regular schooling, especially with today a lot of things came up around the world and the war and the gender and and I feel like from what I've been researching, the world is really controlled by a very small group of people that are very it's all
So are we conspiracy theorying now, or?
yeah
Yep.
yeah but
Another rabbit hole.
it's,
We're gonna go
it's
down.
connected to the school, because it's all even gender. Now they're bringing in confusing kids around their gender in the schools.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
I feel I can't even send her to that kind of a place because
Well-
there's so
But
much.
the issue is, isn't it, what are you going to do? She's going to live with you when she's 16, 17, 18, 25. Well, she's
No,
going to
but
have to
there's
go out
others-
into that world, isn't she?
Yeah, no, but there's other school, she's open, I don't want to send her to a system that will teach her all those lies. There's other options of schooling.
The
It doesn't
system is
have to.
completely incapable of teaching her lies when you're teaching her the truth.
Yeah. This
So-
is the example of Eloisa in Australia.
Yep.
Her kids don't believe in the education system as it is, but they can engage with it and they can learn
To their benefit.
learn to their benefit within it. But that's because there's a very solid base at home
Yeah.
that is very grounded in love and truth.
Yeah.
So
But when you say that it's important that the kids go educate, I'm getting the impression, and might be wrong, that it's the conventional education system that you're talking about?
no, the
Oh.
point really is if you are avoiding your issues with your conventional education, you will not make a sound judgment on what is good
You're
education for your
incapable
own
of making
child.
a sound judgment.
You can't. You're always going to be trying to protect those feelings in yourself
Yeah.
and protect your child from having the same feelings.
And in
And
fact,
that-
all your research is going to support your injured version.
Yeah.
You're going to attract that research because it supports your injured version.
Yeah. So the real solution is not, or the real answer is not which school do I send my child to. It's have I dealt with my issues around
Some of it.
schooling and authority and structure
Yeah.
and I would say
And maths and
some of
science
it.
and chemistry
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
language and
Yeah. arts and all of the things, because that's all going to impact how you make choices and how you assess situations.
But not only that, when your child goes into an environment that is difficult, the child learns how to lovingly handle a difficult environment. If your child never has an experience of lovingly handling a difficult environment, they are not going to understand love at all. They're not going to understand how to love other people at all. And so by restricting them from ever having a bad experience, what we're physically doing is we're